Hey guys! Tonight, we're wandering back to a time when street lamps were oil wicks, shadows felt thicker, and the night had rules. You're standing in a cobbled alleyway, your breath fogging in the cool air, when the church bell tolls 9 times. That's not just the hour, it's the warning. In this medieval town, the curfew bell means indoors, now. Anyone caught outside afterward can be fined, beaten, or worse, accused of lurking for sin. You probably won't survive this one if you're prone to midnight snacks or late night walks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You edge closer to the firelight spilling from a tavern door. Inside, a few locals whisper nervously about the night warden, an officer whose job is to patrol after curfew, armed with a lantern and a short cudgel. He's not hunting thieves exactly, though that's the excuse. He's hunting disobedience. In this place, order is everything, and night belongs to authority. Historians still argue whether these laws were truly about safety or control. On paper, the curfew was practical. Prevent fires from spreading in tightly packed wooden towns. But you can feel it's about more than that. The darkness itself feels policed. Windows are shuttered, chimneys capped, and the only legal light flickers from the church spire. You try to imagine living like this, where a candle burning too long could mean suspicion of witchcraft or of plotting after hours. One chronicler in the 14th century wrote about a man fined for unlawful light, as if the flame itself had committed the crime. You picture him arguing, "But I was reading scripture," and the official just glaring, quill poised to record his defiance. There's a murmur of fear in every conversation you overhear. People whisper of the hue and cry, the communal alarm that could wake the whole town if someone shouted "thief" or "fire." Imagine that. No phones, no sirens, just a human wave of noise crashing through the streets, every able-bodied person compelled by law to grab a weapon and join the chase. Sleep? Forget it. You slip into the shadows near a doorway as the night watch passes. Their boots click in rhythm, the iron on their belts glinting with authority. They carry horns. If they blow them, the whole neighborhood will know someone broke the law. One man in the group is yawning. He doesn't look much different from you, just colder, and burdened with the responsibility of keeping silence alive. The strangest part is that, in some towns, curfew didn't lift until the church bells rang at sunrise. You'd wake to the same sound that ended your freedom hours earlier. Bells ruled your life, marking prayer, meals, work, and sleep. There's a sort of comfort in that, though, a rhythm that spares you the anxiety of choice. When the bells say sleep, you sleep. When they say wake, you obey. You glance at a stray dog nosing around a cart. Even the animals seem to know where not to tread. One false bark could draw the warden's glare. In some places, even dogs were subject to curfew. They could be seized or killed if found loose after dark. It sounds absurd, but in towns with narrow streets and open waste channels, a stray could mean disease. So yes, dogs had bedtime too. Still, not every rule was strictly enforced. If you had connections, say, a merchant's favor or a priest's blessing, you might bribe your way through the night. A small coin slipped to the warden, and suddenly you're on official business. Power always finds a loophole. You wander further, past the blacksmith's forge, dark now, cold. During daylight, the clang of iron fills the air, but after the bell, silence is law. In some cities, it was illegal to make noise after certain hours. Hammering, shouting, even singing could bring punishment. Medieval quiet hours were enforced with a zeal that makes your apartment noise complaints look trivial. And yet, there's an odd peace in the order of it all. The stars seem sharper without firelight everywhere. You catch a faint smell of bread cooling, someone defying curfew for the sake of morning trade. You almost smile. Humans will always find ways to bend rules for survival, even in centuries of strict control. The night grows colder. You think about how these laws shaped daily existence, not just curfews, but entire rhythms of fear and obedience. Imagine children growing up measuring time by bells instead of clocks, learning that safety means silence. You'd probably start whispering too, even to yourself. There's a story about a man in London who was arrested simply for wandering. No crime, just wandering. The constable wrote, "He had no evident purpose." Can you imagine? Existing aimlessly as a punishable act. But it's not far from how people then saw the world. Every movement had to fit the script of order. Some scholars think these laws were a kind of social performance. When the warden caught someone, it wasn't about punishment alone. It was about showing everyone else that law existed, that someone was in control. The public flogging, the stocks, the fines, they were theater, keeping fear alive. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was meant to reform or merely to remind. You lean against the wall, hearing faint laughter from a window above. Someone whispers, "Go to bed, fool," and shutters slam shut. Maybe they've seen you. Maybe they think you're a spirit, or worse, a lawbreaker. You feel the pulse of that fear, that ancient anxiety that someone's always watching. And yet, it's strangely cozy here, isn't it? The way the rules tuck you in, the bells cradle you between obedience and sleep. You start to understand how comfort can coexist with control, how even strictness can feel like safety when the world beyond is chaos. The warden's lantern glows again at the far end of the street. You step back into shadow, heart steady, breath slow. He passes by, oblivious. You're invisible for now, a ghost between laws. Tomorrow, new decrees will rise with the dawn, but tonight, you're drifting through a world where every flame, every footstep, every whisper is bound by ancient order. Morning finds you in the same town, though it feels entirely new in the daylight. The church bell that last night signaled confinement now rings freedom. And merchants spill into the streets with carts creaking and voices echoing against the stone. But freedom here, like everything in the Middle Ages, comes with rules, and the first you bump into are about your clothes. You tug at your tunic, wondering if you look out of place. You do. A constable's eyes follow the shimmer of your sleeve like a hawk tracking prey. In this world, fabric is more than fashion. It's a declaration of class, virtue, and obedience. Sumptuary laws, they called them, strict legal codes that told people exactly what they could wear based on rank and income. It sounds absurdly fussy, but the reasoning had teeth. Historians still argue whether these laws were about moral discipline or economic control. On one hand, nobles claimed they were preserving social order. Peasants shouldn't dress like lords, after all. On the other hand, it's clear they feared imitation. If everyone looked rich, how would anyone know their place? You pass a tailor's stall where bolts of dyed fabric hang like flags of rebellion. Crimson and purple are the worst offenders, reserved for royalty and bishops. The merchant glances around before letting a whisper slip. Silk sleeves for the right price. You imagine the risk. In some towns, wearing silk without status could mean losing the garment on the spot or a hefty fine. You brush your fingers against a deep blue cloak. The tailor hisses, "Don't touch that unless you've got a title." Blue, the pigment from crushed lapis, was nearly as precious as gold. Only the wealthy could flaunt it openly. You retreat, adjusting your plain wool as if to apologize. Sumptuary laws were everywhere. England, France, Italy. The Holy Roman Empire all had their versions. They regulated not just clothing, but jewelry, hats, and even shoe length. Yes, shoe length. In the 14th century, fashionable men wore long, curling poulaines, pointy shoes that could stretch absurdly far beyond the toes. A knight might be allowed 6 inches of shoe tip, while a commoner could have no more than 2. Imagine the fashion police measuring your footwear with a ruler. And the punishments? Public humiliation. Imagine being stripped of your fine garment in the market square, the fabric displayed like evidence in a trial. Caught wearing velvet without license, the bailiff would declare. You might laugh, but people truly feared this. It wasn't just about money, but shame. Clothing was your identity, and being forced out of it meant losing face. Historians still argue whether the laws even worked. People found ways around them, mixing cheaper fabrics with expensive trims, sewing forbidden colors on the inside of sleeves, or passing luxury items off as gifts from a noble cousin. One Englishwoman records show was fined for wearing silk upon her head under pretense of mourning. The loopholes, like the veils, were thin but clever. You move through the crowd, noticing how even colors seem ranked. Peasants in muted browns, merchants in gray-green, priests in black, nobles in blazing crimson. It's like walking inside a living hierarchy chart. But there's rebellion brewing here, too. Young apprentices in forbidden hats, daughters of butchers flaunting lace cuffs. They all walk with a kind of quiet defiance. There's a strange tension between vanity and survival. If you dress too plainly, people think you're lazy or poor. Too richly, and you're arrogant or criminal. Imagine the anxiety of choosing socks that won't get you arrested. Fashion becomes performance. Every hemline a declaration of loyalty, or a dare. A baker's wife hurries by in a skirt embroidered with small silver threads. The constable stops her. "Too fine for your standing," he says, and she flushes redder than the forbidden dye she's wearing. She mutters something about inheritance, her dead aunt perhaps. He sighs and waves her off because paperwork is tedious even for medieval lawmen. You exhale too, feeling the shared relief. Still, not everyone had it so easy. In Florence, inspectors known as Ufficiali del Don, officials of the women, roamed the streets, checking women's clothing for illegal opulence. Picture that. Fashion police centuries before Instagram influencers. Some were even paid by the fine, so the more outrage they discovered, the richer they got. A velvet ribbon could make their week. The church backed these laws wholeheartedly. Pride, vanity, lust, these were sins stitched into every costly seam. A woman dressed in gold, one preacher warned, is the devil's net shining to ensnare. You almost laugh, but you notice how the crowd's laughter never rises above a murmur. Mocking clergy wasn't smart business. The irony, though, is delicious. Bishops and abbots themselves often ignored these restrictions. Their robes shimmered with embroidery, Their rings flashed with gems. One historian dryly noted, "The more they preached humility, the more they sparkled." You imagine monks comparing belt buckles under their cassocks. But not all sumptuary laws were about wealth. Some were weirdly specific to morality. In certain regions, widows had to wear black for exactly 1 year and could be fined for switching back to color early. Brides could be punished for too much lace, unmarried women for not enough. It's as if your wardrobe was a resume, constantly audited by society. You pass a young man selling belts carved with small pewter studs. "2 coins," he says proudly. You recognize the gleam in his eye. Ambition. But those pewter studs? Illegal for his station. He doesn't care. "If they catch me, I'll sell to them next week," he grins. You can't help but admire the medieval hustle. Historians still argue whether these restrictions kept economies stable or strangled creativity. Some say they prevented inflation by discouraging overspending. Others see them as power plays, a way for the upper class to display superiority without earning it. Either way, the laws couldn't kill desire. They just made it sneakier. You step into a small chapel for shade. Even here, the rules whisper from the shadows. The carved saints wear crowns and fine robes. The peasants depicted in stone at their feet look humble by design. The hierarchy repeats, eternal and unavoidable. Yet as sunlight slants through colored glass, you notice something else. The blue pigment on Mary's cloak, the color once reserved for royalty, now sanctified. The divine wore what mortals couldn't, and that's the quiet rebellion of faith itself. People might not afford lapis dye for their tunics, but they could kneel beneath its glow in stained glass and feel part of something grand. Maybe that's how they survived it, the daily reminders of status balanced by fleeting moments of beauty. Outside, the bell tolls again. Noon. You feel the hum of order wrapping around you, like fabric you didn't choose but can't quite take off. Maybe you'd survive a medieval night, but dressing for the day, that's the real challenge. The noon bell fades, and you find yourself drifting toward the marketplace, where the air smells like yeast, smoke, and ambition. Traders shout over one another, hawking everything from turnips to tin cups. The stone-paved square hums with the chaos of commerce, bartering, gossiping, bargaining. But here, even the scent of bread is governed by law. You stop by a baker's stall, where golden loaves cool on rough boards. The baker notices your gaze and lowers his voice, as if revealing a secret. "They weighed it this morning," he mutters. "By God's scales." You blink. Bread inspection, an actual medieval institution. Under the assize of bread and ale, bakers were bound by law to sell loaves of consistent weight and quality. One crumb too light, and they could face public shame. Or worse, you pick up a loaf. It's heavy, dense. The baker snatches it back. "Don't press it too much," he says. "If it collapses, they'll think I cheated." It sounds ridiculous until you remember. Bread was life. Too much air, too little grain, and people starved. Bread fraud wasn't a small sin. It was theft of survival. Historians still argue whether the bread laws protected consumers or the ruling elite who controlled grain supply. Either way, the result was the same. A world where a baker might sleep less for fear of his oven betraying him. Nearby, a small wooden platform stands empty, but you recognize it instantly. The pillory. It's the medieval version of Yelp reviews, except your bad rating gets nailed to your face. If a baker sold underweight bread, he'd be locked here with his loaves hung around his neck while townsfolk pelted him with stale crusts or rotten eggs. "The punishment fits the bread," one chronicler joked. You imagine the humiliation and how the smell alone would cling for days. You wander on, drawn by another aroma, ale. A brewer pours foamy beer into a wooden jug, humming softly. Brewing, like baking, was a risky art bound to law. Every gallon had to be measured for strength, purity, and fairness. Women dominated this trade. They were called alewives, and their taverns served as neighborhood hubs, but they also faced strict inspection. A group of officials strolls by, their noses high. One dips a wooden paddle into the brew, sniffs, and frowns. "Too weak," he declares. The alewife winces. Weak ale meant watering down, a punishable deceit. Too strong, and it suggested hoarding or misuse of grain. You can't win. The inspector smirks. "We'll test again tomorrow." He leaves with a jug for further sampling. You don't need a law degree to see the scam. Historians still argue whether these inspections were fair regulation or just state-sponsored extortion. Many brewers, especially women, faced fines that drove them out of business. And yet, ale remained essential, safer than most water, and often the only affordable source of calories for the poor. You sip a cup offered by the brewer herself, a wiry woman with flour on her sleeves. "I brew strong," she says defiantly. They drink weak. You laugh quietly. Her rebellion is subtle but firm. Even in a world of rules, someone always bends the recipe. There's a rhythm here, an almost musical pattern of law and life. Bells mark the hours, loaves mark the trust, and jugs mark the measure of honesty. Every bite and sip is a contract between survival and punishment. You wonder if people ever truly relaxed while eating. A man next to you mutters about the assize men, local enforcers who patrol the markets, inspecting weights, scales, and goods. He rolls his eyes. They fine me for a false measure, but their own scales tip like drunkards. You grin. The hypocrisy feels timeless. The concept of consumer protection isn't new. It just came with more public humiliation. Imagine if modern grocery stores handled bad reviews the same way, a manager chained by the frozen section while customers throw baguettes. You'd shop local just for the drama. You pass a cheese seller next, her cart laden with wheels wrapped in cloth. Cheese, too, had its rules. In some towns, officials tested quality by poking iron rods into the wheels. If the smell was foul, the batch could be confiscated or destroyed. "Cheese trials," the woman jokes. "Better than witch trials." You suspect she's only half joking. Not all markets were grim, though. The chaos also bred community. Children dart through stalls, dogs beg for scraps, and minstrels play nearby. The tension of law weaves with laughter, like the sourdough and yeast that rise together. Even the officials, for all their pomp, seem part of the ritual. Still, you can't help noticing how control hides behind the facade of order. Bread laws kept peasants fed, yes, but they also kept them dependent. A bad harvest meant the crown could blame the bakers, not the system. The fair price was determined by those who never went hungry. You feel the weight of that loaf again, suddenly heavier in your hand. As you walk on, you spot a strange contraption, a tall wooden post with iron hooks. A sign nearby reads, "For falsifiers of food and drink." The guide beside you whispers that in some places, dishonest vendors were dragged here, chained, and dunked into muddy water. A taste of their own medicine, literally. You shudder, then chuckle despite yourself. Justice had a flair for the theatrical. Historians still argue whether public punishments deterred crime or entertained crowds. Probably both. You picture townsfolk gathering at dawn, bread in hand, to watch a brewer's shame as morning entertainment. Breakfast and justice, someone might have called it. The sun climbs high, heat rippling through the square. The smell of yeast and ale thickens, mingling with sweat and smoke. For all its order, this marketplace is alive in a way modern supermarkets aren't. Here, every loaf carries risk, every pint carries pride. You watch a young boy carry a basket of rolls to a church official. Alms bread, he says. The priest blesses it, not because it's holy, but because it's legal. Bread given to the poor had to meet regulation, too. Even charity was audited. And yet, beneath the weight of rules, people still smile. They gossip about prices, flirt over onions, sneak bites of apples when no one's looking. Law shapes them, yes, but never entirely cages them. Humanity ferments quietly, like the ale barrels in the corner, bubbling, transforming, always pushing against its wooden limits. You take one last breath of the market's air, warm bread, sour yeast, faint hops. If the curfew was control through fear, this is control through appetite. A world where justice smells faintly of flour and beer foam. You step away, full but uneasy. Somewhere behind you, the baker begins to hum again, measuring his next batch with trembling care. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone will laugh at our own invisible rules, the labels, the inspections, the fine print. Probably. The more things change, the more our bread stays weighed. By late afternoon, you wander toward the tallest building in sight, the church. Its bell tower cuts into the sky like a stone finger, calling not just the faithful, but the obedient. Inside, the cool air smells of incense and beeswax, and your footsteps echo against flagstones polished by centuries of penitence. Here, law and religion blur until they're indistinguishable. You can almost feel it, the weight of unseen rules pressing down from the rafters. In the Middle Ages, the church wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was the supreme regulator of behavior. You could sin in silence, but the law heard everything eventually. A monk glides past, robes whispering. You watch him light candles one by one. The act seems peaceful until he mutters something about forbidden hours. In this world, even when you pray is legally defined. Bells dictate worship, meals, and rest. The church's timetable rules all. Miss Mass too often, and your neighbors might whisper your name to the confessor. Neglect of duty, they'd call it. A few whispers more, and suddenly you're a heretic. Historians still argue whether the church's reach was protective or parasitic. Was it keeping souls safe, or simply tightening control under the guise of holiness? Either way, you don't dare sneeze. Not during service, at least. Yes, sneezing. Somewhere in a dusty archive lies a decree from the late 1200s, scolding parishioners for disturbing the divine order with bodily noises during sermons. Sneezing, coughing, or even whispering could result in a fine or public penance. You imagine trying to stifle a sneeze mid-sermon while St. Peter glares down from stained glass. Medieval ASMR, but with real consequences. The church isn't just a place of prayer. It's also the courtroom, the registry, the social network, and the rumor mill. You overhear confessions happening in curtained alcoves, where the whisper of guilt exchanges hands like currency. The priest nods gravely, issuing not mercy, but penalty. Say 50 Ave Marias, fast 3 days, pay 1 shilling to the poor, via the church, of course. Sin becomes transaction, and forgiveness a receipt. At the far end, a young woman kneels before a heavy wooden box, the offertory chest. Her eyes flick nervously to the priest counting coins. You can't tell whether she's buying absolution or insurance. Maybe both. And then there's the Sabbath. Sunday wasn't just holy, it was legally enforced. Work on the Lord's Day could land you in stocks. In 13th century England, even baking bread or combing wool was forbidden on Sundays. One man was fined for shoeing a horse after sunset. You smile. Someone clearly had places to be. But these laws weren't merely moral. They were economic, too. A forced day of rest meant control over labor, markets, and rhythm. Historians still argue whether the Sabbath law was spiritual commandment or early workers' rights, though the peasants doing double labor on Monday might dispute the latter. You step into a side chapel where confessionals line the wall like dark mouths. The priest inside one gestures for you to kneel. You hesitate. What would you confess? Sneaking out after curfew? Touching forbidden fabric? Breathing too loudly during the homily? The absurdity of it almost makes you laugh until you catch the priest's eyes. Humor is rarely forgiven here. Confess your failings, he murmurs. You whisper something vague about curiosity, about watching when you should obey. He nods slowly. Curiosity, he repeats. That is the seed of rebellion. You want to argue, but his tone suggests he's cataloging sins, not opinions. Outside again, the sunlight feels almost defiant. A group of boys play with sticks near the church gate, turning them into pretend swords. A nun scolds them sharply. No fighting on holy ground. The irony drips like candle wax. You wonder if anyone ever truly relaxed under so many sacred noes. And yet the church's order had a strange comfort to it. In a chaotic, disease-ridden world, these rules offered structure, even predictability. If you obeyed the laws, maybe the plague would spare you. If you gave enough alms, maybe your crops wouldn't fail. Superstition mingled with bureaucracy until people couldn't tell the difference. There's a story from France of a rooster put on trial for laying an egg. The villagers believed the egg came from the devil. The church, ever thorough, assigned clergy to testify. The bird was convicted and executed to cleanse the land. You laugh quietly, only half sure it's okay to laugh. The more you listen, the more the rules expand. Laws against blasphemy, swearing, laughing too loud in graveyards, dancing near the altar. Yes, that one was real. One particularly zealous bishop banned laughter during Easter festivities, claiming it disrupted holy solemnity. Imagine surviving the Black Death and still getting fined for chuckling at church. Historians still argue whether these prohibitions stemmed from faith or fear. Some say they were desperate attempts to maintain dignity in an age of chaos. Others think it was about reinforcing hierarchy. God at the top, clergy beneath, peasants kneeling forever below. A bell rings again, vespers. You follow the sound, drawn like a moth. Monks file into the choir stalls, chanting in low Latin tones. The sound fills the air like slow-moving honey, hypnotic and ancient. For a moment, you understand the appeal, the order, the rhythm, the promise that somewhere, someone knows the rules, even if they're absurd. You close your eyes and imagine a world without clocks or calendars, only bells and sins. It's easy to see how control could feel like safety. In a time of plague, famine, and war, laws gave people something solid, even if that solidity came from fear. The chanting fades. You open your eyes and see a boy slipping through a side door, carrying a basket of leftover communion bread. You catch his grin, a flash of mischief. "Don't tell," he whispers. Maybe he's feeding his hungry family. Maybe he's just stealing. Either way, he's breaking divine and civic law in one bite. You smile back, because sometimes mercy wears a smirk. As the last notes of the chant dissolve into silence, you step outside into the amber light. The streets are quieter now, filled with the distant clatter of shutters closing. You realize you've spent an entire day walking through laws: curfew, cloth, bread, and now belief. Each one a thread in the same medieval tapestry, control disguised as care. You pause by the church door and glance up at the gargoyles crouching above. They grin down, frozen mid-laugh, rain-streaked and ancient. Maybe they're mocking humanity's endless obsession with order, or maybe they're laughing because they've seen it all before. Evening draws its long golden line across the rooftops, and the town grows hushed again. You wander toward a cluster of low houses where faint music and laughter drift through the open shutters. A wedding feast is underway, though in this century, even marriage is a labyrinth of laws. You pause by the doorway, invited by a wave from a cheerful stranger, and before you know it, you're seated at a rough wooden table between a jug of mead and a plate of roasted roots. But this isn't the romantic medieval wedding you might imagine. Love? That's optional. Law? That's mandatory. In this world, marriage is more contract than connection, regulated by the church and recorded with a thoroughness that would make modern tax offices jealous. The ceremony isn't even what makes it official. It's the consent, a simple spoken exchange, "I take thee," before witnesses, seals the deal. Once said, it's binding. No ring, no priest, just two voices. And boom, you're married. Historians still argue whether this freedom was empowering or terrifying. On one hand, it meant even peasants could wed without permission from nobles or priests. On the other, it created chaos. Imagine drunkenly proclaiming affection at a feast, only to have the whole town insist you're now husband and wife. "He said it before witnesses," they'd say, "so it counts." Medieval hangovers had consequences. Across the table, a local elder tells you that not long ago, a couple was dragged to court because the man denied his spoken vows. The court ruled them married anyway. The evidence? He looked sincere. The poor man had to pay dowry restitution, basically an early divorce settlement. You sip your mead slowly, deciding never to look sincere again. The church eventually tightened its grip, decreeing that marriages should occur before a priest and be publicly announced. But still, for centuries, the whispered promise stayed valid in law. That's how you end up with records of cases where judges ruled based on who had been seen sharing a bed, or even which side of the bed they slept on. Yes, that was real evidence. And when love soured, well, annulment was tricky business. Divorce, as you think of it, didn't exist for most Christians. Only annulment, proof that the marriage was never valid to begin with. Maybe the couple was too closely related. Medieval people discovered everyone was too closely related, or one was underage, or one hadn't truly consented. The process often involved witnesses and, disturbingly, physical evidence. You overhear someone whispering about the bed test. It was exactly what it sounds like. Church officials inspecting the marital bed for signs of consummation, sheets examined, testimonies heard. In one famous case, a husband claimed his wife was too cold to complete the act, so a panel of matrons was called to investigate her body temperature. Historians still argue whether this was compassion or cruelty. Your inner voice mutters, and you take another sip of mead. The bride tonight looks radiant, her dress modest, her veil simple, but you notice the priest hovering, eyes sharp, ensuring the ritual's propriety. He reads from a worn book of canon law, the Latin words droning like bees. The vows are exchanged, hands clasped over a Bible, and just like that, two lives become one under the law's gaze. The crowd cheers, though you sense a quiet calculation in the laughter. Marriage here isn't just union, it's alliance, economics, and property transfer rolled into one ceremony. Dowries, for instance. Every bride brings her portion, negotiated meticulously between families. If she dies, it often returns to her kin. If he dies, she might lose it entirely. The law wraps love in ledgers, and if children arrive, inheritance rules kick in. Another jungle of conditions and exceptions. The church loves order, but lineage loves to complicate it. A man beside you, clearly tipsy, leans over. "You know," he says, "in my father's day, you could be fined for staying unmarried too long." You blink. He's not kidding. In some towns, bachelors over a certain age paid a celibacy tax. Officials claimed it encouraged population growth. You suspect it mostly encouraged fake marriages. The feast grows louder as the night deepens. Bread breaks, cups clink, and music spills into the street. The newlyweds smile shyly, surrounded by relatives counting coins and promises. You realize every gesture is steeped in law. The blessing, the meal, even the dancing. In some places, newlyweds weren't allowed to dance on Sundays or before the parish priest blessed their union. Break that rule, and your first week of marriage could begin in the stocks. Romantic, in a very medieval way. Historians still argue whether such tight regulation preserved morality or simply trapped people in surveillance. For women especially, marriage laws could be double-edged. A wife gained some protection. Her husband was legally bound to support her, but she lost independence. A married woman couldn't own property, sign contracts, or testify in court without permission. In essence, one vow erased her legal identity. At the table, someone cracks a joke about wives who brew stronger ale than their husbands, and the crowd laughs nervously. You recall the alewives fined for defiance earlier that day. The laughter carries an edge. It's amusement born of caution, the kind people use to hide fear. And yet, amidst all the regulation, love still sneaks in. You see it in small gestures, the groom brushing a crumb from his wife's veil, the shy way she squeezes his hand. It's fragile, this defiance of affection within a cage of laws, but it's real. Outside, the stars stretch wide above the thatched rooftops. A fiddler plays softly while children chase each other between benches. You feel the hum of old joy under the weight of ancient rules, a reminder that even in centuries of control, people still found ways to be human. As the feast winds down, you notice an older woman watching from the edge of the crowd, her hands folded tight. She's dressed in plain gray, widow's garb. By law, she's forbidden from remarrying without a priest's consent, and rumor says she defied that once before. A quiet rebellion flickers in her eyes as she watches the new couple. You almost imagine she's daring the law to stop her from loving again. When the final candle gutters out, the priest blesses the couple's chamber, mumbling words that sound more bureaucratic than holy. The newlyweds slip away hand in hand toward a small hut where love and law will wrestle in the dark. The guests cheer one last time, and you, well, you step back into the cooling night, smiling at the absurdity of it all. Marriage, in this world, isn't about two hearts. It's about paperwork with witnesses, linen inspections, and the occasional scandalous loophole. But still, beneath the holy ink and dusty statutes, you sense something timeless. The quiet stubbornness of people trying to make love fit inside a rule book and failing beautifully. The night air cools as you leave the glow of the wedding feast behind. Crickets hum in the grass, the moon hangs low, and for a while you think maybe, just maybe, you'll get a quiet stroll. But then a cry echoes down the street, "Bring the accused!" The words snag the air like claws. You turn toward the commotion. A crowd gathers outside the guild hall, torches sputtering orange light. At the center stands a trembling man, his wrists bound with rope, his face streaked with mud. His crime? Nobody's sure yet, but you can tell the mood. This isn't justice as you know it. This is performance. In the medieval mind, guilt wasn't determined by evidence, but by divine proof. And divine proof apparently loved theatrics. The system was called trial by ordeal, and it came in many flavors: fire, water, and, in one famously odd case, cheese. The sheriff reads from a scroll in a booming voice. The accused is charged with theft. He denies it, the sheriff announces, so God must decide. A murmur ripples through the crowd. You feel the chill creep into your spine. Historians still argue whether these trials were true belief or calculated fear tactics. Maybe both. The logic was circular but tidy. God would never let an innocent man suffer unjustly. So if you got burned or drowned, clearly you deserved it. You step closer as the ordeal begins. First, the ordeal by fire. The man must pick up a red-hot iron and walk 3 paces, carrying it. His hands will then be bound and inspected 3 days later. If the wounds heal cleanly, he's innocent. If they fester, well, God has spoken. You watch the priest bless the iron while the accused stares at it like a snake ready to strike. The smell of heated metal mixes with sweat. When he lifts it, the sizzle cuts the night like a scream. You flinch, but no one else does. They've seen it before. The iron clatters to the ground, and the man collapses. The priest nods solemnly. God will show mercy or not. You'd think people would flee such madness, but to them it's a ritual of certainty. When the world's chaotic, there's comfort in believing justice is visible, literal. A burned hand is proof, a clean one, miracle. Next comes ordeal by water. For witches, thieves, and rumor-mongers alike, the test is inverted logic. The accused is tied and thrown into a pond. If they sink, they're innocent, because the pure element of water accepts them. If they float, they're guilty, rejected by God's element. You can already hear the problem forming in your head. Either way, you're doomed. A few men drag a woman forward, her skirts already soaked from the mud. Someone whispers she was accused of cursing a harvest. The priest mutters a prayer. Ropes tighten around her waist. She glances at you for half a second, her eyes steady, calm. "I can swim," she says quietly. The sheriff frowns. "Then may God forbid you from doing so." The crowd holds its breath as she's lowered into the pond. For a few seconds, silence. Then she bobs upward, gasping. The people gasp too, not with relief, but vindication. "Guilty!" they shout. She's pulled out, coughing, half drowned. Somewhere, a clerk writes her name into a ledger, the official record of guilt. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were rigged from the start. Some evidence suggests priests secretly cooled the iron for favored defendants or tied knots loose enough to sink the innocent fast. Divine justice, it turns out, had human hands, and then, as if the night hasn't grown strange enough, someone brings out a wheel of cheese. You stare. Ordeal by cheese, the sheriff proclaims proudly, for lesser disputes. Apparently, in some regions, clergy settled small accusations by blessing a lump of bread or cheese, then having the accused swallow it. If they choked, God had judged. If they didn't, case dismissed. A local boy whispers, "It's called the corzend." You nod, dazed, because honestly, you can't decide whether that's justice or a medieval cooking show. The ordeal ends with murmured prayers and scattered laughter, though no one looks particularly joyful. The man with the burned hand has been taken away, the woman carried off, the cheese divided among officials. The people disperse slowly, muttering that God has once again kept order. You linger by the pond, where moonlight trembles on the surface. It's quiet now, eerily so. You wonder what it must have felt like to live under such a system, where faith replaced evidence and survival hinged on spectacle. Perhaps they needed it, this theater of judgment. In a world without science or certainty, divine drama filled the void. Still, a nagging thought crawls into your mind. Maybe not everyone believed. Maybe some villagers, deep down, rolled their eyes just like you did. Maybe they whispered doubts to each other in the dark. But saying them aloud? That was its own kind of heresy. You recall a story told by an old chronicler about a priest who secretly tested the ordeal by water, using his own apprentice. The boy floated, alive and shivering. "Then I too would be guilty," the priest whispered, shaken. The tale ends abruptly, as many did when written by men cautious of authority. But the silence after says enough. Historians still argue about when the practice truly ended. Officially, ordeals were banned by the Church in 1215 after Pope Innocent III ruled that man shall not tempt God. But in smaller towns, the rituals lingered for centuries. Faith, once woven into law, doesn't unravel easily. You kick a pebble into the pond, watching the ripples distort the moon's reflection. Maybe that's the real medieval mystery, not why people believed, but how they lived with doubt under a system that forbade it. Behind you, the torches dim, and the last clerk closes his ledger. The crowd's gone, the verdict's written, the evidence left to the elements. You take a long breath and exhale slowly. The air smells of iron and damp earth, heavy with the weight of human certainty pretending to be divine. For now, the town sleeps easier, convinced justice was done. You walk away quietly, listening to your own footsteps fade, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls, steady, ancient, indifferent. Dawn slides over the rooftops, pale and hesitant. You wake to the sound of hooves on cobblestone and a noise that doesn't fit, a squeal sharp and frantic. When you push through the half-awake crowd gathering in the square, you see it, a pig, trussed and squealing, standing before a robed magistrate. The crowd watches in silence. You blink once, twice, but no, this is not a butcher's scene. This is court. Yes, the pig is on trial. If yesterday's ordeals felt surreal, this is pure medieval absurdity, but absolutely real. Across Europe, for centuries, animals could be, and often were, prosecuted for crimes. Pigs, cows, goats, dogs, even roosters. Some were accused of theft, others of destruction, and sometimes, horrifyingly, of murder. You can't decide whether to laugh or gasp, so you do both. quietly. The bailiff announces the charges. The pig did feloniously slay a child. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. The magistrate nods gravely, as if pigs regularly hire defense counsel. A clerk scribbles notes. The scribe's pen scratches like an insect. Historians still argue why these animal trials happened. Some say they reflected deep superstition that animals, like humans, could be vessels for sin. Others think they were social theater, a way to ritualize tragedy and restore order when chaos, like a child's death, shattered the village's fragile peace. Either way, the logic is disturbingly consistent. Sin must be punished, no matter who commits it. The defendant snorts, shaking the rope around its neck. Its snout glistens in the morning light. A man steps forward, the defense advocate. Yes, even the pig gets a lawyer. You suppress a laugh again because the sight of this solemn man bowing toward the animal is both ridiculous and strangely moving. I plead mercy, he says, for the beast acts by instinct, not malice. The judge nods thoughtfully. And yet, he replies, the law must show dominion. That's the heart of it, the belief that man rules all creation, and rule must be demonstrated. Even justice becomes a display of human hierarchy. The witnesses speak next. A farmer, pale and trembling, recounts the event. She was feeding it scraps, he says, voice cracking. It turned wild. It bit. The crowd murmurs. You can almost feel their hunger for explanation, their need for cause and effect. Tragedy without justice is unbearable. Absurd justice is easier than none. In some places, such trials ended mercifully, the animal exiled or pardoned by reason of nature. But often, the sentence was death, and not quietly either. Records describe pigs dressed in human clothes, paraded through the streets before hanging. The goal was both punishment and warning. See, even beasts face the law. You catch the eye of a small boy in the crowd. He looks confused, afraid. His father whispers, "It's justice, son." But you know the truth. It's grief dressed as order. The judge declares his verdict. The pig is guilty. The words hang heavy, absurd, but no one laughs. The executioner steps forward. The crowd crosses themselves. You turn away before the final act, your stomach twisting. Historians still argue whether anyone truly believed these creatures bore guilt, or whether it was all symbolic ritual. Some scholars think the trials soothed communities traumatized by random suffering. By punishing something, anything, they reclaimed control. Others argue it was about theology. Sin had poisoned creation itself, so purging even animals restored cosmic balance. You walk away, but the echoes of that courtroom cling to you. Justice, it seems, wasn't always about fairness. It was about reassurance. You think of the ordeals by fire and water, and now this, the same need for spectacle, for law as performance. Later, you stumble into a quieter corner of the town where another kind of animal trial unfolds. Chickens cluck in cages. Goats nibble straw. A monk reads from a parchment, an excommunication order. For rats, you blink again. The rats of autumn, he declares, stand accused of destroying grain. You can't help a small laugh, though the monk doesn't notice. In real history, entire colonies of vermin were summoned to court, officially. They were given notice, offered legal defense, and even granted time to appear. When they didn't show up, for obvious reasons, the defense lawyer argued that travel was dangerous because cats lay in wait along the route. The judge accepted the excuse. Case adjourned. It sounds like a comedy sketch, but it reveals something darker. These weren't ignorant people. They were desperate ones. When famine or plague hit, blaming invisible forces wasn't enough. You needed a tangible culprit, a goat, a sow, a swarm of rats, all perfect stand-ins for chaos. You find yourself smiling sadly. Humanity has always personified its fears. Whether in devils, witches, or misbehaving livestock, it's easier to punish a body than confront a mystery. A tanner beside you shrugs. Better to hang a pig than curse your neighbor, he says. You realize he's right. The ritual isn't about logic, it's about avoiding blood feuds. Sacrifice the beast, save the community. A grim efficiency, but effective. You wander further, the morning now warm and humming with flies. In the distance, a man leads a donkey through the gate, its ears flicking nervously. Someone mutters, "Stole from the abbey." You sigh. Even the humble donkey isn't immune to the law's long arm. Historians still argue whether these trials ever fooled anyone, or if everyone played along for the sake of peace. The written records suggest meticulous seriousness, dates, witnesses, judges, penalties. Yet, between the lines, you sense a shared understanding. This is theater. It has to be believed to work, but not too deeply. By noon, the square is empty again. The pig is gone, the priest has retreated, and the flies have claimed the stage. You sit on a low stone wall, listening to the town's heartbeat slow. What lingers is not horror, but pity. How far people will go to find order in chaos. And maybe you think we're not so different. We still hold our own ritual trials, though the defendants are abstract now. Politics, systems, ideologies. We still crave visible justice, something we can point to and say, there, balance is restored. You take a deep breath. The smell of straw and sweat lingers, but beneath it, something sweet. The baker's oven starting their evening batch. Life goes on, laws and all. You brush the dust from your sleeves and stand. Somewhere, a rooster crows, innocent for now. You can't help but whisper to it, half smiling, "Stay out of trouble, friend." The afternoon sun settles lazily over the rooftops, baking the stones warm beneath your boots. You follow the smell of wood smoke and stew to a quieter street where a cookshop's shutters hang open. The scent makes your stomach growl, but before you can step inside, a sign painted in red catches your eye. No flesh on Friday. You chuckle softly. Even meals come with commandments here. In this medieval world, what you eat is everyone's business, especially the churches. Lent, Ember Days, fast days, feast days. More than half the calendar tells you what not to eat. Meat, milk, cheese, eggs, all forbidden on certain holy days. The logic, they say, is to tame the body and honor God. But it's hard to feel holy when you're hungry. Inside, the cook looks exhausted. He's stirring a pot that smells suspiciously rich for a fish day. When you lift a brow, he whispers, "It's eel," or so we say. He winks, and you get it. Not fish, but pork, hidden beneath herbs and secrecy. You grin. Rebellion tastes good. Historians still argue whether these food laws were about faith or food supply. Some believe fasting regulated scarce resources, saving meat for times of abundance. Others see it as moral theater, reminding people who owned their appetites. Either way, the kitchen became a battleground of law and longing. You take a seat near the hearth as the cook ladles you a bowl. He leans close. "Don't tell the priest," he murmurs. "He eats goose on Fridays himself." You nearly laugh, but the man's face is serious. Hypocrisy is an open secret here. whispered behind wooden spoons. Outside a bell rings, the church's signal for vespers. A few diners cross themselves mid-bite, as if the bell itself can see through broth. One woman nudges her child's spoon away. "No milk tonight," she says gently. The boy sighs, eyes big and betrayed. You can't blame him. Lent lasts 40 days, and that's a long time to pretend turnips are satisfying. The laws go beyond fasting. Some towns ban the sale of meat altogether during Lent, even for travelers or the sick. Butchers board up their shops, and inspectors roam the streets, sniffing for the scent of roast fat. There's a story of a man in Normandy fined for frying bacon with intent to tempt. You can almost hear his defense. "I was only thinking of breakfast. In some places, you're not even allowed to smell indulgence. A Venetian ordinance once ordered that tavern keepers cook no flesh in open air, lest it corrupt passers-by. The air itself had to remain pure. Imagine the torture of walking past an invisible cloud of roasted sin. Historians still argue whether these bans actually made people pious or just more inventive. Probably the latter. Cooks found ways to disguise meat as fish, wrapping it in batter, shaping it like a carp, or boiling it in brine. Monks supposedly mastered the art of culinary camouflage. Their Lenten fish often hid tender veal beneath clever sauces. You can't decide if that's devotion or delicious deceit. You take another spoonful. The broth is earthy, smoky, definitely not eel. Across the room, two friars sip from bowls and nod approvingly. Their hands are clean, but their consciences maybe a little greasy. Then comes the strange side of the food laws, punishments for defying them. In some towns, fasting violators were forced to parade through the streets with a fish strapped to their heads. Elsewhere, offenders knelt before the church door, holding candles shaped like sausages. The crowd would laugh, the priest would scold, and the cycle continued. You picture it vividly, humiliation wrapped in humor, penance disguised as comedy. But beneath the laughter, you feel the fear. For peasants, one slip could mean ruin, fines, loss of trade, or even excommunication, the spiritual death sentence. In a world where heaven and hell are daily realities, that's not something you risk for a drumstick. You ask the cook what he eats when the rules grow too heavy. He shrugs. Bread, onions, and patience. His grin flickers like a candle. And on feast days, I remember what flavor is. He's not exaggerating. Feast days, those blessed loopholes in the calendar, turn deprivation into extravagance. Meat flows, wine spills, tables groan with abundance. But even that is legislated. Who can host? Who can eat first? Who can afford extra salt? It's all written down somewhere. Even joy requires permission. There's a moment, as the evening shadows stretch, when you feel the rhythm of it all, the swing between denial and indulgence, between hunger and feasting. Maybe these rules exist not to kill pleasure, but to make it mean something. After all, what's joy without contrast? Outside, a small group of children play near the baker's oven. One sneaks a bite of something golden and crispy. A neighbor shouts, "No meat on the Lord's Day." The boy freezes, cheeks bulging, eyes wide. Then the old man laughs and waves him off. Bah, even saints get hungry. You smile. There's mercy hidden in the cracks of every law. Historians still argue whether medieval fasting made people healthier. Some studies suggest the long breaks from meat improved digestion and longevity. Others note the outbreaks of foodborne illness when fasting ended, people overeating after 40 days of restraint. You imagine the chaos of Easter dinner, joy, guilt, and indigestion in equal measure. The cook sets down a second bowl. "This one's for travelers," he says kindly. You thank him, and as you eat, you think of all the invisible rules guiding every spoonful, rules born of faith, fear, and survival. It's easy to mock them now, but they kept communities aligned, synchronized like clockwork, long before clocks existed. As night settles, you step outside. The air is cool and fragrant, alive with smoke and quiet talk. Somewhere down the lane a woman sings softly while stirring a pot. Her song rises like steam, mixing comfort with obedience. You realize that in this world law doesn't just shape justice, it shapes hunger, taste, even smell. Every meal is a negotiation with holiness. You glance back through the cookshop window. The man wipes his hands on his apron and extinguishes the hearth. Tomorrow he'll light it again, pretending the same stew isn't what it seems. And maybe that's the secret of survival here, not rebellion or obedience, but performance. Everyone plays their part. Everyone pretends just enough to keep life simmering. The trick is knowing when to lift the lid. The next morning opens with a wind sharp enough to sting your cheeks. The town feels different now, quieter, more measured, as if everyone's already counting something. And they are. The tax collectors have arrived. You first notice them by the clink of coins and the rustle of parchment. A pair of men in heavy cloaks stride through the square, one holding a long roll of names, the other carrying scales. They look less like servants of justice and more like wolves with ledgers. "Household levies," one calls. "All payments due before noon?" You instinctively pat your pockets. Then remember you're a time traveler, not a taxpayer. Lucky you. Taxes in the medieval world weren't neat percentages and printed receipts. They were a tangle of dues, tributes, and absurdities that reached into every corner of life. Some were royal, some ecclesiastical, others entirely local inventions. If something existed, roof, road, hearth, beard, someone had found a way to tax it. You watch a line forming near a small wooden table. A farmer offers eggs in place of coin. The collector nods, barter counts. A shoemaker grumbles, sliding forward to pay his stall rent. Then a man with a magnificent beard steps up, chin high and prideful. The collector smirks. "Ah, the beard tax." You nearly choke. A beard tax? Yes. In several kingdoms, England under Henry VIII, Russia under Peter the Great centuries later, even small European duchies, beards were taxable property. The reasoning varied: hygiene, vanity, revenue. The result was the same. Your face cost money. The collector holds out a small metal token stamped with a crown. "To show you've paid," he says. "Wear it on your chain." The bearded man sighs and drops a few coins into the chest. "A man can't even grow dignity for free," he mutters. You stifle a laugh. Historians still argue whether the beard tax was moral policing or mere greed. Some say it discouraged vanity. Others claim it was an early experiment in progressive taxation. The richer your whiskers, the higher your rate. Either way, you find yourself absently stroking your chin, grateful you're off the record. Further down the line, a chimney sweep pays his hearth tax. That one's painfully real, the infamous smoke tax of England in the 17th century, though its roots reach deep into the medieval habit of monetizing necessity. Each chimney counted as proof of wealth. No chimney, no fee, but also no heat. Imagine winters without fire just to dodge the bill. You watch a woman argue with an official about the window levy. "We need light," she protests. "Then pay for it," he snaps. Some towns taxed every pane of glass, a policy so unpopular that people bricked up their windows rather than pay. Whole streets went dim. Darkness, apparently, was cheaper than sunlight. The scribe beside you chuckles. "You can tax anything," he says cheerfully. And they do. He's right. There were gate tolls, road tolls, bridge tolls, ferry fees, mill fees, market fees, tithes, offerings, and bribes thinly disguised as processing costs. You could be taxed for selling, buying, crossing, or even standing still in the wrong parish. Historians still argue whether such taxes were efficient governance or organized extortion. Records show that the money rarely trickled down to public good. Roads stayed muddy, bridges broke, and the only thing consistently maintained was the treasury's appetite. You wander away from the crowd toward a stall where a juggler performs for coins. He grins, tossing apples into the air. "They'll tax the sky next," he jokes. "Each star you see, a penny." The crowd laughs nervously, half amusement, half belief. Because in truth, nothing feels safe from the collector's pen. Near the churchyard, another type of tax looms, the tithe. 1/10 of everything you earn or grow goes to the church. In theory, it's for the poor. In practice, it keeps clergy well fed. You spot a priest overseeing sacks of grain stacked neatly by the gate, his hands moving faster than his prayers. A farmer kneels before him. "I've nothing left," he pleads. The priest sighs, then gestures to the man's cow. The farmer hesitates. The priest doesn't. You turn away, heart sinking a little. Maybe it's not greed. Maybe it's just the machinery of survival. Institutions feed on faith and fear alike. But it's easy to see how resentment brewed quietly in the hearts of peasants. Revolt often began with taxation, not ideology. Bread you can ration, but dignity taxed is harder to swallow. There's humor here, too, the kind that thrives in frustration. A mason tells you with a wink about the marriage duty tax some lords imposed. "They say it's to bless the union," he laughs, "but really, it's to make sure they get paid before the honeymoon." Another adds, "And when you die, they'll tax that too." The laughter feels brittle but necessary. He's right, though. Death doesn't end debt. It formalizes it. The Harriet requires heirs to pay the Lord by handing over the deceased's best animal or possession. Imagine losing your ox because your father died on a bad week. You picture the family arguing with officials while the cow lowing softly in the background. Death and taxes indeed. Historians still argue whether these intricate levies built order or resentment. Some see them as the scaffolding of modern governance, primitive attempts to structure economies. Others call them legalized robbery. You suspect both are true, depending on which side of the collection table you stand. As the sun dips lower, the collectors pack up, their chests clinking heavy with coin. The townsfolk scatter, muttering curses softened into prayers. The air smells faintly metallic, like old money and tired hope. You walk past the inn, where the landlord grumbles about his ale duty. Even taverns paid for the privilege of pouring beer, though most passed the cost on to customers. You smile, thinking of the poor alewife from days ago, fined for strength and now taxed for weakness. In medieval life, you're guilty either way. The juggler waves as you pass again. "Still got your purse?" he calls. You pat your side instinctively. "For now," you reply. He laughs. "Good. By sundown, they'll charge for air." You watch him disappear into the alley, his laughter echoing like coins in a tin. The street grows dim as lamps are lit one by one. You glance up and wonder whether each flame, each puff of chimney smoke, each growing beard carries a hidden price tag. Probably. And yet, despite the endless levees people endure, they complain, they laugh, they adjust. Life hums on, imperfect but persistent. Maybe that's the quiet rebellion of every age, surviving bureaucracy with humor intact. You breathe in the cool evening air and murmur, "At least the stars are still free." Then you pause, glance at the sky, and add, under your breath, "For now." The sky deepens to indigo as you cross a narrow bridge and enter a quieter quarter of town. The streets twist tighter here, the houses smaller, the whispers sharper. A woman hurries past you with her shawl pulled high, and an old man mutters, "Careful what you touch after sunset." The air feels different, heavier, watchful. This is the realm of women's laws, and it's as tangled as any forest. You pause near a fountain where a small group gathers, mostly women, murmuring in low voices. One sells herbs from a basket, thyme, sage, feverfew, and something that looks suspiciously like wolfsbane. "For childbirth pains," she says, pressing a bundle into another woman's hand. The exchange seems ordinary until a patrol of church wardens rounds the corner. Instantly the crowd scatters like startled birds. You watch the herb seller shove her basket beneath her cloak. One of the wardens calls out, "You there! What are you selling?" Her voice shakes as she answers, "For cooking, sir. Nothing else." He eyes her suspiciously. Witchcraft's no trade for a Christian woman. In this century, the line between medicine and magic is razor thin. Women who heal are saints when the cure works, devils when it doesn't. Historians still argue whether witch hunts were about faith, fear, or power, but you can see the social logic plainly. Knowledge is dangerous when it doesn't wear a priest's robe. You follow her down a narrow lane, past laundry lines fluttering like surrender flags. She moves quickly, eyes darting. "People don't like what they don't understand," she says softly, glancing back. "And they don't understand much." You smile sadly. Human nature hasn't changed much. In medieval law, women live in a paradox. They are vital. Midwives, bakers, brewers, keepers of homes, and yet legally fragile. Their words count less in court. Their property defaults to fathers, brothers, husbands. A single accusation can undo a lifetime of labor. The herb seller knows this. Everyone does. At the next corner, a young woman is being scolded by a parish constable. "Too loud," he says, disturbing the peace. Her crime, laughing in the street after curfew. "You'll draw men's eyes," he warns. She bites her lip but says nothing. You can't decide which part is sadder, the law or her silence. Historians still argue whether medieval society was uniformly oppressive or simply inconsistent. Some towns allowed women to trade, even own workshops, while others forbade them from standing alone in markets. Freedom was regional, fleeting, and always conditional. But nothing terrifies this world more than the wise woman. You've seen her shadow everywhere, the herbalist, the midwife, the widow with knowledge too specific to be innocent. One chronicler described them as those who whisper where men cannot. That whisper to authority sounds like rebellion. You pause near a door marked with a chalk cross, someone's way of warding off the evil eye. Inside, a baby cries, and an older woman hums a lullaby. "Salt on the threshold," she murmurs, "and sleep will come." To you, it's superstition. To them, it's protection. And perhaps the difference doesn't matter. When you live at the mercy of plague, childbirth, and famine, a handful of salt feels like power. Still, the church disapproves of unsanctioned miracles. Women caught mixing herbs for healing might be accused of invoking spirits. The punishment varies, sometimes a fine, sometimes a flogging, sometimes worse. One woman, history tells, was hanged for making a love charm out of rose petals and hair. The record reads simply, "She tempted the heart beyond its rightful will." The herb seller stops in front of her cottage. "You're not from here," she says quietly. You shake your head. She smiles faintly. "Then be careful how kindly you speak. Too much kindness is suspicious." You laugh softly, then realize she's not joking. There's another figure here too, the midwife. Both revered and feared, she holds life in her hands and therefore walks a perilous line. Laws required midwives to be licensed by clergy, sworn to report any unnatural birth, which could mean anything from twins to a breech delivery. If the baby survived against odds, some whispered that the devil had helped. You can imagine the pressure. One miracle too many, and your blessing turns to curse. Historians still argue whether witch hunts were truly widespread in the medieval era or later obsession. What's certain is that suspicion took root early. The foundations of fear were built now, each local law, each whispered accusation, laying the groundwork for centuries of paranoia. You walk past a small church where a notice hangs. Any woman found brewing potions or muttering charms shall answer before the ecclesiastical court. The words seem to hum with threat. You picture the herb seller standing here at dawn, chalk dust still on her fingers, pleading that her rosemary tea is no more magical than the priest's incense. And then there's the irony that never fades. Men practice alchemy openly, searching for gold or immortality, while women practicing healing are scorned. You remember the cook disguising pork as eel and realize it's the same trick. Survival through pretense. A breeze carries the smell of smoke, and you spot a group of townsfolk gathered near the edge of the green. A woman kneels in the dirt, surrounded by guards. She looks unafraid, her face calm. She cursed her neighbor's cow, someone whispers. Milk turned sour. The priest raises his hand. Let confession cleanse her. The woman only says, "It was thunder, not me." You want to intervene, but you know better. The law here isn't about evidence. It's about fear finding shape. The crowd shifts, murmurs, disperses. For now, she's spared. The rumor hasn't caught flame. But you feel the heat of it waiting in the air, a law half-written, ready to burn. As dusk folds over the town, you pass a window glowing with lamplight. Inside, women spin flax and gossip softly. One jokes that her husband's snoring could wake the saints. They laugh, covering their mouths. It's the gentlest kind of rebellion, humor as defiance. You linger, smiling at their courage, because that's the truth, hiding beneath the witch trials and the sermons, the quiet endurance of women who keep loving, healing, and laughing under rules designed to silence them. Every herb sold, every song hummed over a sick child, every eye rolled behind a priest's back. It's all a small victory against absurdity. The herb seller's voice drifts from her doorway behind you. "Don't fear the law," she says softly. "Just don't stand still long enough for it to notice." You walk on through the deepening night, the air smelling faintly of rosemary and smoke. Somewhere, a child laughs in her sleep. Somewhere, a prayer and a charm sound the same. Morning stirs again, though this time it's not bells that wake you, but shouting. A burst of laughter, a crash, and a distinct slosh of ale on stone. You follow the noise down a crooked lane toward the tavern, where sunlight filters through clouds of brewing smoke and mischief. The door hangs open. and the smell hits first. Yeast, sweat, and something vaguely tragic. Inside, it's chaos in the friendliest way. Farmhands singing off-key, two men arguing about dice, a woman dancing on a table with a tankard raised high. The mood is infectious, but outside the doorway, two officials in drab gray cloaks stand like thunderclouds. Their presence is the medieval buzzkill, the morality patrol. This is where the law meets the public, where ordinary joy collides with regulation. You might think laughter's harmless, but in this world, sound itself can be illegal. Town ordinances across Europe list the strangest bans. No singing after sunset, no shouting near churches, no excessive merriment during Holy Weeks. Imagine being fined for enthusiasm. A constable steps inside. "Quiet the songs," he shouts, somehow missing the irony. The fiddler freezes mid-note. The dancers lower their arms. You can almost hear the disappointment sighing out of the room. The tavern keeper nods solemnly, offering a quick apology and a mug of ale, technically a bribe, though everyone pretends it's hospitality. Historians still argue whether these public order laws were about morality or control. The church claimed drunkenness led to sin. Civic leaders said noise led to unrest. Either way, both agreed that a drunk peasant with opinions was a dangerous thing. The constables sniff disapprovingly. "Is it Friday?" one mutters. "Then no ale after prime?" You glance at the sunlight. Late morning. Too early for last call. The tavern keeper shrugs helplessly. "Sir, the men work hard," he says. "They need spirit." The officer frowns. "They'll find spirit in prayer." You smirk, unable to resist whispering, "Not the same kind." The nearest drinker hears you and nearly chokes with laughter. "Aye, traveler speaks truth," he shouts. Instantly the constable's head whips toward you. "Name?" he demands. "Just passing through," you say. He narrows his eyes. "Best keep passing." There it is again, the medieval rhythm of suspicion. A cheerful stranger, possible spy, too quiet. Possible thief, too loud. Definite sinner. You slide onto a bench beside a group of locals, all whispering about the fines for tavern disorder. In some towns, simply being found drunk twice a week could cost you a month's wages. Public urination, brawling, or singing bawdy rhymes could mean a night in the stocks. One man jokes, "I spent more time in the stocks than my own bed." Nobody laughs too hard, because it's probably true. Outside, you hear the thud of wooden mallets. A pair of men are assembling the pillory in the square. Someone's due for a lesson in civic shame. You drift out with the crowd, drawn by curiosity and that uncomfortable magnetism of punishment. The offender is already there, a young man, cheeks flushed, redder than wine. His crime, blasphemous singing and public disorder. The crowd chuckles. The executioner, really just a bored guard, locks his hands in the wooden frame. 3 hours, he says, and no spitting. You doubt the crowd will obey the last part. The prisoner grins sheepishly, trying to make light of it. "I'll sing quieter next time," he jokes. Someone throws a cabbage core. Someone else claps. You realize this is entertainment. Public punishment here isn't just deterrent. It's the medieval version of a morning show. Historians still argue whether the stocks humiliated or united communities. Some say they enforced conformity through fear. Others claim they provided harmless catharsis, a sanctioned outlet for resentment. Watching your loud neighbor get pelted with vegetables might actually make everyone behave better, if only to keep the fun going. You wander through the crowd and overhear more stories of absurd laws. My cousin was fined for laughing during Lent, says one woman. They said he mocked the Lord. Another adds, a man in Rouen was whipped for dancing with his own wife, claimed it was unchaste movement. You shake your head. The medieval imagination could turn joy itself into a crime. At least laughter survives. You notice how quickly the crowd's mockery softens into camaraderie. A merchant hands the prisoner a cup of water. Someone else hums a tune. Law may demand shame, but people instinctively create humor instead. It's rebellion disguised as kindness. Later, the stocks stand empty again, drying in the sun. Children clamber over them like a playground, oblivious to their purpose. The same wooden frame that punished fathers now entertains their sons. History's full of those little ironies. You head back into the tavern where the fiddlers started up again, quietly this time. The air feels lighter, mischievous. They'll hear us, someone warns. Let them, the fiddler replies, bow resting on strings. Music's no sin if it makes the soul lighter. You raise your cup in silent agreement. There's something almost noble about these small defiances. In a world obsessed with law, joy itself becomes protest. Singing, drinking, joking, each a reminder that the human spirit can't stay pinned like parchment. You think of the herb women from yesterday and the bakers before them. Whether it's laughter, bread, or whispered healing, rebellion always sounds the same. Alive. Outside, a bell tolls 8 times. Curfew approaches, and the tavern empties reluctantly. The fiddler packs up, the candles gutter low, and the last echoes of laughter melt into the night air. You stand at the threshold a moment, savoring the lingering warmth. A drunk stumbles past, humming. Keep quiet, someone hisses. He grins. If the Lord didn't want songs, he wouldn't have made throats. You can't argue with that kind of logic. Historians still argue whether medieval punishments truly reformed anyone, or just reminded them who held power. But as you watch the man vanish into the darkness, humming without fear, you think maybe control was never the full story. Maybe the whole dance between rule and rebellion, the curfews, the stocks, the fines, was just humanity learning where laughter fits between fear and faith. You walk on, the faint rhythm of that forbidden tune still in your ears. Somewhere behind you, the constable sneezes, mutters a curse, and trips over a cabbage. You grin in the shadows, because even in an age of silence, joy always finds a loophole. The next morning smells of iron and soot. The clang of hammers pulls you toward the lower quarter, the craftsman's district, where every sound is a heartbeat of industry. Sparks leap from doorways, smoke curls from forges, and sweat glints on faces streaked with ash. Here, the rules of life are written not by priests or kings, but by the guilds, the secret brotherhoods of medieval labor. A blacksmith waves you inside his workshop, wiping his brow with a soot-stained sleeve. Don't touch anything glowing, he warns with a grin. That's the first law. You smile, stepping carefully among tools that look older than time. On the wall hang symbols carved into wood, hammers, circles, strange letters. They're marks of the guild, a mix of oath and identification, as binding as any royal decree. Guilds governed everything from shoemaking to swordsmithing, baking to brewing. To join meant safety, status, and rules. Lots of rules. You couldn't just start a trade. You had to serve years as an apprentice, then as a journeyman, before earning the title of master. And when you finally did, you swore loyalty not just to your craft, but to the secrecy that protected it. Historians still argue whether guilds were protective communities or controlling monopolies. Some say they shielded workers from exploitation. Others claim they smothered innovation. The truth, as always, lives in the hammer's swing between both. The blacksmith's apprentice, barely 15, struggles with a bar of glowing metal. He's learning balance, the master explains, not just in the arm but in the soul. A smith who hurries ruins steel and temper alike. You nod, sensing the quiet reverence. Craft here is religion, and failure a sin. In a corner, an older man inspects a finished blade, running his thumb along the edge. Too proud, he mutters. The metal mustn't gleam more than the man who made it. The blacksmith chuckles. That's the guild talking. Pride breaks faster than iron. Each guild had its own laws, some practical, others bizarre. In Paris, a candle maker couldn't work after dark. Fire risk, obviously. In London, bakers were forbidden from sleeping while dough rises, lest laziness infect the loaves. Shoemakers couldn't use a rival's pattern. Carpenters couldn't poach clients, and tailors couldn't wear the fashions they made unless their guild approved. Yes, even the creators of clothing had wardrobe laws, and all of it was sealed by oath. No man shall reveal the mysteries of the craft to outsider or enemy, one old charter declares. Violators could face heavy fines, exile, or, depending on the rumor, mysterious disappearances. Historians still argue whether guild secrets truly existed, you think, or if they were simply ways to maintain mystique. Either way, mystery paid well. The smith laughs when you ask about his own initiation. Oh, that was a day, he says, eyes twinkling. They blindfolded me, made me swear on an anvil that I'd never reveal the formula for the perfect temper. He leans in. Of course, the secret formula was just hard work and luck, but it sounds better this way, doesn't it? You grin. Every trade has its magic. Beyond the forges, the street hums with craft. Tanners beating hides, coopers hammering barrels, cobblers bent over leather. Each workshop is its own world with posted rules. No idle chatter, no false measure, no drunken hands. You realize that in a town full of unpredictable justice, these private codes might be the only fair system around. Guild courts handled disputes internally, often with surprising civility. A broken contract could mean fines, but theft or fraud brought expulsion, social death for any craftsman. At midday, the guild bell rings. The noise is deafening. Workers spill into the street, eating bread and onions, trading gossip. A young woman carrying baskets of dyed cloth catches your attention. Weavers' Guild, she says proudly when you ask. They let women join sometimes. Her tone carries both pride and defiance. You remember how rare that freedom is. The guild's power extends beyond labor. They influence politics, prices, and even fashion. The master blacksmith explains, if the king wants swords, he asks us. If the town wants gates, we build them. They can't afford to anger us. You imagine entire governments held together by calloused hands. But that power comes with paranoia. Guild secrets are guarded like royal treasure. Apprentices who run away can be hunted down. A mason caught selling his techniques to a rival city might be branded or worse. Knowledge, the smith says quietly, is coin. You spend it wrong, you starve. Historians still argue whether guilds stifled progress by hoarding techniques. Some point out that centuries passed before inventions like the blast furnace or printing press spread widely, thanks in part to trade secrecy. Others counter that guild discipline preserved quality in a world prone to chaos. You watch a blacksmith tap his finished sword and think maybe they were right. The sound rings perfect, clean, honest, alive. As the day wears on, you visit the carpenters next. They're raising a frame for a new hall, every beam fitted with mathematical precision. A master carpenter stops to nod at you. Each joint is signed, he says, showing a tiny carved mark. If the building falls, we know whose fault it is. Accountability, medieval style. Evening finds you in the tavern attached to the guild hall. The walls are hung with crests, hammers, looms, anvils, each representing a craft sworn to excellence. The masters sit at long tables discussing prices and apprenticeships. The smell of ale and ambition fills the air. A toast is raised. To honest hands and steady work. Cups clink, laughter rolls, and for a moment you sense real pride, a sense of identity deeper than rank or title. Here, the law doesn't come from distant kings or holy men, but from shared labor. It's the purest democracy the medieval world can manage, one forged from sweat and calluses. Still, whispers travel between mugs. The tanners think they can raise prices. Someone grumbles. We'll see about that. You catch fragments of rivalries, of secret deals struck in the flicker of candlelight. So much for unity. Even in a brotherhood of labor, politics smolders under the surface. Before you leave, the blacksmith presses a small iron nail into your hand. For luck, he says, and to remind you, every rule we make is to stop the fire from eating us alive. He means it literally and metaphorically. Outside, the forges glow red against the night, rhythmic as heartbeats. You feel the hum of creation, the dignity of craftsmanship tethered to secrecy and pride. Maybe these guilds, with all their rules and rituals, were humanity's first lesson in how power works best, when shared in whispers, not shouted in laws. You tuck the nail into your pocket and keep walking, your fingers warm from the forge. The night smells of smoke, iron, and quiet rebellion, the perfume of a world still building itself, one hammer stroke at a time. The road out of town winds through open fields where morning mist hangs low and sheep graze under the watchful eyes of shepherds. You'd think the countryside feels freer, lighter, but even the open road has its laws. The moment you set foot beyond the city gate, you become a suspect, a traveler, a stranger, a problem waiting to happen. You approach the toll gate at the edge of town. Two guards lean against a wooden barrier, half bored and wholly nosy. State your business, one says, as if the dirt road requires justification. You explain you're passing through. Passing through costs a penny, he replies flatly. And if you're staying the night, another. He gestures toward a ledger the size of a Bible. Every name recorded, every coin counted. Travel in the Middle Ages isn't freedom. It's a privilege you pay for. Roads are property, and movement is suspicion. Without papers or a noble's letter, you're just another wanderer. Vagrancy laws make sure of that. Too poor to prove your destination, and you might be branded a beggar or worse, a spy. A woman beside you, wrapped in a patched cloak, pleads with the guards. I'm only visiting my sister, she says. They shrug. Where's her parish seal? When she can't produce one, they motion her aside. You look away, heart sinking. In this world, belonging isn't about home, it's about proof. Historians still argue whether these vagrancy laws were about safety or control. Some say they protected villages from thieves. Others see them as a weapon against the poor, trapping labor where lords wanted it. You watch as the woman is led away, her basket of apples confiscated as bond. The guards return to their chatter. You hand over your coin, pass through the gate, and the air seems colder on the other side. The open road stretches ahead, muddy, uneven, full of rules invisible to the eye. Every bridge, every crossing, every patch of forest belongs to someone. By noon you reach another checkpoint, a small toll house by a stone bridge. A sign reads, "For the King's Road and safety of travelers, payment is required." You chuckle softly. Safety, sure. The guard lounging by the post barely looks up as he names the price. A halfpenny per cartwheel, a farthing for feet. You imagine a tax collector somewhere dreaming of toes. Across the bridge, a merchant caravan has stopped for inspection. Guards rummage through crates, checking weights, counting bolts of cloth. One mutters about import duties. You realize you've stepped into the earliest customs office, complete with arbitrary enforcement. The merchant protests, "These goods are for fair trade." The guard snorts, "Then you won't mind a small fee for fairness." You keep walking, though part of you wonders if these endless levies built civilization or simply slowed it down. Historians still argue whether medieval tolls funded infrastructure or just fattened officials. Either way, the road stayed rough, and the guard stayed well fed. Later, you stop at a wayside inn, a crooked building leaning like it's tired of standing. The innkeeper greets you with a wary smile. "Travel papers?" he asks immediately. You produce a scrap stamped by the last gatekeeper. He squints. "That'll do." Then he points to a board listing the town's ordinances. No gambling, no singing after sunset, no women alone upstairs, no meat on Fridays, no unpaid rooms beyond 2 nights. You sigh. Even rest is regulated. At dinner, the common room fills with voices. Merchants, pilgrims, and a lone minstrel share stories. One merchant jokes, "The only free men in England are the dead ones." Laughter ripples through the room, too loud, too true. A traveler beside you mutters, "Keep your tone down. They fine for jesting now." He's not wrong. Laws against mocking authority were common. In some places, travelers could be flogged for insulting a toll collector or a lord's horse. You decide to sip your ale quietly. The minstrel starts playing a soft tune, something about home and longing. His voice is low, steady. The crowd listens still. Then a guard appears in the doorway. "No songs of sedition," he barks. The music dies. The minstrel bows, folding his lute like a wounded bird. "Only of travel," he says, smiling faintly. The guard grunts and leaves. You hear someone whisper, "Travel is sedition enough." Outside, the stars bloom again, indifferent to the petty tolls below. You step into the cool night air, gazing down the road ahead. The path glimmers faintly, lined with milestones carved centuries ago, markers of distance and dominion. Each stone says, "You are allowed here, but only barely." By morning, you pass through another village. At its entrance stands a wooden post with a notice. No stranger may remain more than 3 days without work or sponsor. Beneath it hangs a single glove, a local signal that someone was caught trespassing. You imagine the story, a traveler seeking rest, turned into warning. You ask a farmer about it as he sharpens his scythe. He shrugs. "Too many wanderers these days. They say vagrants spread plague." You glance around. No sign of sickness, only fear that never really leaves. Historians still argue whether the idea of home parish strengthened communities or strangled them. Bound to land, peasants couldn't easily escape bad harvests or cruel lords. But maybe those same boundaries gave people roots when everything else shifted. freedom and safety rarely share a bed. A horse cart passes you on the road, the driver humming. He calls out, "Headed north? Watch the toll by the river. They charge by beard length there." You laugh, thinking back to that absurd tax collector. Humor, you realize, is the true passport across any border. As you walk, you notice small shrines by the roadside, tiny crosses, piles of stones, offerings of bread. These are unofficial laws too, gestures of custom and faith, marking invisible territories. Touch one respectfully, and you're welcome. Ignore it, and you risk anger, gossip, or worse. Law lives not only in parchment, but in habit and superstition. By sunset, the road narrows through a forest. The air grows damp, the light dim. You hear the creak of a wagon behind you, a merchant convoy guarded by men with spears. "Join us," one calls. "Too dangerous to walk alone." You fall into step beside them, grateful. The captain explains, "Bandits, wolves, tollmen, it's all the same. Each wants coin or blood." You glance around the darkening trees. "So why travel at all?" you ask. He smiles grimly. "Because staying still costs more." The words stay with you as night deepens. You realize the strangest truth of medieval law. It doesn't end at city gates. It travels with you, on your boots, in your purse, in your accent. You can escape almost anything here, except regulation itself. When the stars finally pierce the treetops, you set up camp beside the road. The convoy's fire flickers, voices low and weary. Someone hums the minstrel's band song again, softer this time, safe beneath the canopy. You lie back, listening to the music fade into crickets and wind. Freedom, you think, isn't the absence of law. It's the courage to keep walking anyway. The road unwinds into the next dawn, soft and golden. Dew glitters on the grass like coins scattered by a careless god. In the distance, the silhouette of a city rises, a place older, heavier with memory. But something's changing here. You can feel it. The air hums with questions instead of decrees. For the first time in this journey, the old order feels tired. You reach a crossroads marked by weathered posts. One points toward the abbey, another toward the royal court, and a third, almost new, bears a strange inscription, Universitas, a university. The very idea is radical, knowledge outside of the church's exclusive grip. You follow the sign, curiosity tugging at your heels. The streets buzz with young voices. Students in patched robes argue under the eaves, their Latin sharp as blades. You catch fragments. Reason above ritual. But the soul? Prove it then. It's exhilarating and a little dangerous. Here, ideas are being tested the way swords once were, and not everyone approves. Historians still argue whether universities sparked enlightenment or chaos. They were, after all, born from rebellion. Scholars wanted freedom to think without confessors hovering over their shoulders. The church tolerated it, barely, because educated men served its system. But already you can see cracks forming. A new kind of law is emerging, the law of evidence, of rational debate. You duck into a lecture hall where a master in long robes draws diagrams on a board, circles, stars, geometry. "Observe," he says, tapping the chalk, "how the heavens move not by angel's whim, but by pattern." The students lean forward, half in awe, half in fear. One whispers, "Careful, he sounds like he doubts the angels." In another corner, a young woman listens quietly, ink-stained fingers hidden in her sleeves. Technically, she's not supposed to be here. Women aren't admitted, yet she copies notes faster than anyone. You smile faintly. Change begins exactly like this, soft, defiant, unnoticed until it's unstoppable. Outside, you pass a print shop where the scent of ink fills the air. A man cranks a heavy press, pulling out sheets covered in fresh letters. He's printing pamphlets, another revolution hiding in plain sight. For centuries, words lived only in monasteries, copied by hand. Now, they multiply like wildfire. Soon, every curious mind will have access to knowledge once locked behind Latin prayers. But for the ruling class, this is terrifying. With literacy comes opinion, and with opinion comes dissent. You overhear a bishop complaining to a merchant, "Too many books breed heresy." The merchant shrugs. "Too many taxes breed the same." You almost laugh. Progress is rarely polite. Historians still argue whether the rise of reason truly ended superstition. Certainly, some laws fade. Ordeals by fire vanish. Animal trials dwindle. The church loosens its grip, slightly. But fear never dies completely. It just changes shape. Instead of witches, people now fear philosophers. Instead of curses, they fear ideas. You walk through the market square noticing that punishments are less public now. The stocks sit empty, the pillory gathering moss. Justice moves indoors, into rooms filled with scrolls and witnesses. Bureaucracy replaces spectacle. Maybe that's improvement, less humiliation, more paperwork. But you sense nostalgia too, the way people glance at the silent square. Even cruelty, it seems, leaves a kind of void. A town crier reads aloud a new ordinance. All trials to be held with evidence and sworn testimony. The crowd murmurs approval, confusion, and boredom in equal parts. One old woman mutters, "Evidence? God's eye was evidence enough." You realize she misses the simplicity of faith as law. Order was easier when it came from heaven, not argument. You pause before a tavern where scholars debate over ale. "Aristotle or Augustine?" one demands. "Both wrong," another replies. "Ask the stars." A third slams his mug down. "Ask the peasants, they pay for both." You grin. Philosophy, taxation, and sarcasm finally united. Inside, you overhear a conversation between two clerks discussing rational punishment. "We can't just brand thieves anymore," one says. "The magistrates want proportion." The other frowns. Proportion? If you steal bread, you starve less. What's proportion in that? Their laughter fades into thoughtful silence. Progress, you realize, is uncomfortable work. By midday, the bells ring again, not for prayer this time, but for class. The whole city moves to their rhythm. Students hurrying, merchants arguing prices, scribes copying laws. Even the air feels different, lighter, less afraid. You wander toward the river where a bridge is being built. Engineers debate the angle of the arches, measuring with ropes and compasses. "Mathematics," one declares proudly, "not miracles." You step closer, admiring the symmetry. The future is being constructed one stone at a time, bound by logic rather than superstition. Still, not everyone welcomes it. You pass a friar preaching to a small crowd. "Beware reason without faith," he warns. "It builds towers too tall for heaven's liking." The listeners nod, uneasy. Somewhere between fear and fascination, humanity wobbles toward modernity. Historians still argue whether reason replaced faith or merely dressed it in new robes. You suspect both. People crave order. Whether it's divine or mathematical doesn't matter as much as believing there's pattern in the chaos. As evening falls, the sky turns lavender, the city glowing with lanterns that burn longer, brighter than the old candles you remember from that first curfew. People walk freely after dark now, still cautious, but no longer haunted. You smile at the small freedoms, laughter spilling from taverns, apprentices flirting in doorways, scholars strolling while arguing about stars. You stop by a bookseller's stall. A thin volume catches your eye on the laws of nature and man. The cover smells of ink and curiosity. The bookseller winks. Printed last month, banned next week. You buy it anyway. Inside, the words tremble with possibility. When reason governs, justice ceases to be divine and becomes human. You walk away slowly, the book tucked under your arm, feeling the world pivot beneath your feet. The medieval rules, curfews, trials, taxes, taboos, are crumbling like dried parchment. But in their ruins, something tender is growing. Choice. The air feels lighter as the last bell tolls. You pass a group of students lighting torches along the street. One of them, barely more than a boy, smiles at you. Beautiful night for thinking, he says. You nod. And dangerous, you reply. He laughs softly. The best kind. As you leave the university behind, the wind carries the faint scent of ink and smoke, signs of a world unlearning fear, letter by letter. Tomorrow's laws will be written differently, but tonight you're still walking through their fragile birth where superstition meets reason under a shared, curious sky. Night again, but this one feels lighter, like the world has exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. You walk through the outskirts of a quiet village, its streets washed in moonlight. The air hums with the familiar sounds of life, a dog barking softly, water dripping from a gutter, the far-off murmur of someone singing a lullaby. The laws are still there, invisible threads woven into every doorway and gesture, but they've loosened their grip. You pause near a crumbling stone pillar. Once, it might have held a decree, a curfew notice, a tax edict, a proclamation of punishment. Now it's just stone, its carvings worn smooth by time and rain, a relic of obedience turned to dust. You trace your fingers over its surface, feeling the ghost of every commandment that once shaped lives. The road ahead leads to the ruins of an abbey. The arches stand hollow against the night sky, open to wind and stars. You step inside, your footsteps echoing over mossy flagstones. Where sermons once thundered and laws once echoed, only owls speak now. You find a broken bench and sit, listening to the quiet. It strikes you that silence used to mean fear, the pause before accusation, the hush of curfew. But now, it's peace. Civilization's greatest rebellion wasn't against kings or priests. It was learning how to be quiet without trembling. You think back on everything you've seen. The baker measuring bread under threat of humiliation, the tailor stitching forbidden colors in secret, the women whispering over herbs and salt, the smiths swearing oaths to protect their craft, the laughter behind tavern doors, the traveler paying his penny to cross a bridge. Each one bound by some rule, yet still finding a way to live within or around it. Historians still argue whether the end of medieval law was progress or loss. Some mourn the passing of certainty, the comfort of knowing your place, your penance, your boundaries. Others celebrate the dawn of reason where laws began to protect rather than punish. But here, in the stillness of these ruins, the debate doesn't matter. You realize that all those strange, cruel, and curious rules were never just about control. They were humanity's way of wrestling with chaos, of trying to make sense of fear, hunger, and hope. The moon climbs higher, painting silver light across the fallen altar. You can almost see the shadows of monks filing through, chanting prayers for order. You whisper one back, not to gods or kings, but to the fragile beauty of human stubbornness. Somewhere in the darkness, an old law has just been forgotten, and in its place, a new thought has sparked in someone's mind. A question, a theory, a doubt. That's how civilizations change, not with rebellion's roar, but with the small private act of wondering why. You stand and walk toward the broken doorway where ivy climbs like green handwriting rewriting the past. The air outside feels softer. The road shimmers faintly in the moonlight, stretching toward the future. You pass a shepherd dozing by his flock. He stirs, squinting at you. "Traveler," he mumbles, "where are you headed?" You smile. "Anywhere the laws are quieter." He nods knowingly, half asleep. "Ain't that where everyone's going?" You keep walking, and the night hums around you. No curfew bells, no patrols, no watches at the gate. Just the steady rhythm of your own steps, the sound of a world learning to breathe again. And as you walk, you realize that every strange decree you've witnessed, every beard tax, bread rule, or witch trial, was part of one long story. A story of people trying to balance fear and freedom, chaos and comfort. The laws may have been absurd, but the people living under them were not. They laughed, prayed, cheated, and dreamed. They bent rules without breaking hope. And somehow, that's what carried humanity forward, not the laws, but the loopholes. At the crest of a hill, you turn for one last look. The town glows faintly below, its rooftops calm under the silver moon. The world hasn't changed much, you think. We still write rules to feel safe, still test them, still break them, still need them. The only difference is that now we can choose to ask questions before obeying. You smile, the kind of quiet smile meant only for the dark. The wind sighs through the grass, and the first hint of dawn softens the horizon. It's time to rest. The world you've wandered through, the narrow streets, the flickering torches, the echoes of bells, fades slowly now, like a dream dissolving in the morning light. The air softens, the sounds drift away, and all that remains is the hush of peace. You picture the medieval town shrinking to a distant glow behind your closed eyes. The noise of markets, the clang of hammers, the muttered prayers, all dissolve into gentle rhythm like waves against a shore. The strange laws that once ruled everything, the curfews, the clothing bans, the trials, the taxes, become faint whispers, too tired to chase you anymore. You breathe in deeply. The air tastes clean, new. You've walked through centuries tonight, seen the weight of superstition turn to reason, fear turn to laughter. The people you met, the baker, the herb seller, the scholar, linger somewhere inside your mind, their stories resting like embers. Let them fade now. Let the rules crumble quietly. Let the echoes of all those forgotten laws drift out with your breath. The moonlight, the road, the ruins, they're all still there, but softer now, wrapped in calm. Your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of distant church bells, not tolling for order this time, but for rest. You've survived the medieval world and its impossible laws. You've watched it unravel into something gentler. So now, let go of the last thought. Feel the quiet take shape around you, steady and kind. The air hums low, the night deepens, and sleep comes, slow as dawn, sure as history itself.